At my wife's funeral, she left me a single rusted tin box hidden under her bed. Inside was an old blue passbook. When my daughter saw it, she ripped it from my hands and threw it straight into the garbage. "Throw it away, Dad," she sneered. "Mom never had any money anyway. It is just junk." But when she left the room, I dug it out. What I found written on the very last page in my dead wife's red lipstick made my blood run cold. It was a warning that changed everything. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that disrespecting your parents always comes with a heavy price. My name is Victor Caldwell. I am 70 years old, and for 40 of those years I worked as a construction foreman in the bitter, unforgiving cold of Chicago. I spent my life with calloused hands and aching joints pouring concrete and building scaffolding so my family could have a life of comfort, a life I never had the privilege of knowing growing up. My wife Martha was my rock. We lived a quiet, frugal life in a modest house in the suburbs. She managed every single penny, clipping coupons and quietly carrying the heavy weight of our household so I could focus on breaking my back at work to provide for us. Just a few days ago, Martha passed away from a massive heart attack at 68 years old. There was no warning. There was no long goodbye. There was just a sudden, deafening silence in the house we had shared for decades. The air still smelled like her lavender soap, but the warmth of our home had been buried right alongside her. Less than 24 hours after we put her in the ground, the vultures began to circle. My daughter Valerie is 42 years old now. She is a high-end real estate broker with a taste for the absolute finest things in life. Her husband Derek is a slick corporate finance executive who wears tailored suits that cost more than my first vehicle. They drove up to my quiet home in their pristine imported sport utility vehicle, reeking of expensive cologne and an overwhelming sense of impatience. They did not come to mourn. They came to manage. I was sitting in my worn-out recliner in the corner of the living room. It was the same chair Martha always nagged me to replace, but she secretly loved it because it was molded perfectly to my tired back. On my lap rested a rusted tin box. I had found it shoved deep under Martha's side of our bed earlier that morning, while I was trying to find a pair of her old slippers just to hold something that belonged to her. Martha never kept secrets from me, or so I had always believed. But this heavy metal box was locked tight, and the small brass key was taped securely to the bottom. When I finally managed to pry it open, my hands were shaking. Inside, there was no jewelry. There was no hidden cash. There was just a small, faded blue passbook from a private bank I did not even recognize. It looked ancient, the edges frayed and soft from age. I was tracing my rough thumb over the worn cover, lost in thought, when Valerie marched into the living room. Her high heels clicked aggressively against the hardwood floor, a sound that felt like nails being driven into my skull. She did not ask how I was holding up. She did not offer a comforting hug or ask if I had eaten anything since the funeral. Instead, her sharp eyes locked instantly onto the tin box in my lap. "What is that, Dad?" she demanded, her tone clipped and authoritative. Before I could even register her movement, she reached down and practically snatched the blue booklet right out of my hands. "Valerie." "Give that back," I said quietly, my voice raspy from crying the night before. "That belonged to your mother." She ignored me completely. She flipped through the pages, her perfectly manicured nails scraping harshly against the thin paper. She let out a sharp, condescending laugh that echoed off the living room walls. "It is completely empty," she said, her voice dripping with absolute disdain. "I do not know why you are clinging to this trash." Without a second thought, she tossed the passbook over her shoulder like a piece of worthless litter. It hit the edge of the kitchen wastebasket and fell right in, landing among the damp coffee grounds and discarded tissues from the week of the wake. "Throw it away, Dad," she sneered, looking down at me as if I were a foolish child who simply did not understand how the real world worked. Mom never had any money anyway. She spent her entire life pinching pennies and hoarding useless junk in this old house. Do not clutter up the place with this garbage. We need to start clearing things out and moving forward. I did not say a word. I did not yell, and I did not argue. I just sat there in the heavy silence looking up at my daughter. My eyes drifted slowly from her arrogant, perfectly contoured face down to the designer handbag slung casually over her shoulder. I knew exactly what that bag cost. $3,000. Easily. I knew it because I remember exactly what $3,000 felt like to earn with my bare hands. A sudden sharp ache bloomed in my shoulders, a phantom pain from 30 years ago. I remembered working 14-hour night shifts in the dead of winter. I remembered standing on icy metal scaffolding while the brutal Chicago wind whipped right through my cheap jacket and deep into my bones. I took all the overtime I could possibly get, freezing my hands until they were cracked and bleeding, just so I could afford to buy Valerie her very first high-end laptop for her college classes. I broke my body day after day, year after year, to give her the privilege she now wore like a crown. And here she was, standing in the middle of the house my blood and sweat had paid for, calling her mother's entire life useless junk. Valerie pivoted on her expensive heels and marched away toward the kitchen to find Derek complaining loudly about how dusty the living room was. As soon as her footsteps faded down the hall, I slowly got up from my recliner. My bad knees popped, protesting the sudden movement, but I completely ignored the pain. I walked deliberately over to the trash can. I reached past the damp garbage, past the ruins of the last few days, and pulled out that faded blue passbook. I carefully brushed off a few clinging coffee grounds and opened it once again. Valerie was right about one specific thing. The first few pages were completely blank, but she did not look hard enough. She was too impatient, too dismissive to look at the very last page. I flipped to the back cover of the booklet. There, written in bold, frantic strokes of Martha's favorite red lipstick, was a long, alphanumeric code. It stood out brightly against the yellowed paper. And right beneath that code, in a shaky, desperate handwriting that I recognized instantly as my beloved wife's, was a short message that made the breath catch violently in my throat. It read, "Do not trust them. Save yourself." A cold chill washed over my entire body. Martha was the most meticulous, careful woman I had ever known. She never exaggerated. She never left cryptic notes. If she hid this in a locked box under our bed, it meant something was terribly wrong. My gaze slowly shifted from the red lipstick warning to the hallway, where I could hear Valerie and Derek laughing about something in the kitchen. In that exact moment, my grief began to harden into something entirely different. It hardened into a cold, unbreakable resolve. I slipped the passbook into my inner jacket pocket, right next to my beating heart. I did not know what that code meant yet, but I knew my daughter was wrong. My wife was not hoarding junk. She was leaving me a weapon. The morning sun felt entirely too bright. I sat at the worn kitchen table, slowly nursing a cup of black coffee. The weight of the blue passbook in my jacket pocket was a constant grounding reminder of the promise I had made to Martha the night before. I was not going to be a victim. At exactly 8 o'clock, the front door swung open without a single knock. Valerie and Derek walked in, bringing the brisk Chicago wind with them. Derek dropped a thick manila folder onto the oak table right in front of my coffee mug. The loud slap of the heavy paper echoed sharply. "Morning, Dad," Derek said. His voice was smooth, polished, the exact kind of voice that sold lies for a living. He pulled out a chair and sat directly across from me. "We need to have a serious talk about the future." Valerie paced behind him, checking her phone. She looked completely detached, as if she were waiting for a barista to finish making her morning latte instead of evicting her father from his home of 40 years. "What is this?" I asked, tapping the folder with a rough finger. Derek smiled. It was a practiced, predatory smile. "Dad, your health is our absolute priority right now. Living here all alone in this big, empty house, it is just not safe. Not at your age, and definitely not after losing Martha. We want you to come live with us." "Live with you," I repeated flatly. "Exactly," Derek continued, his tone dripping with fake empathy. "We have that beautiful basement suite. You will have your own space, but you will be close to family. We can keep an eye on you. But to make this transition seamless, we need to handle the estate immediately." He opened the folder and spread out a stack of legal documents. Power of attorney, real estate transfer agreement. Sell this old place, Derek urged, leaning closer. You sign these and I will handle all the tedious paperwork. I will get the house on the market by Monday. The proceeds will go straight into a high-yield retirement fund I manage personally. You will never have to worry about a single bill again. We will take care of everything, Dad. You just need to rest. I looked at the documents, then at Derek's hands. His hands were perfectly manicured, soft, completely untouched by a single day of hard labor. My hands were scarred knuckles, permanently swollen from decades of gripping frozen steel and pouring concrete. He wanted to take the very roof over my head, the roof I built for his wife, and turn it into a neat little digital commission for himself without breaking a single sweat. It has not even been 24 hours since we buried her, I said deliberately, letting the gravelly exhaustion seep into my words. I needed them to think I was weak. I needed them to see a broken, confused old man who was too tired to fight back. I am not signing anything today, Derek. Valerie slammed her phone down on the counter and glared at me. Dad, do not be stubborn. You cannot stay here. The property taxes are due next month. The roof needs repairs. You cannot do anymore. And frankly, staying in this house is just going to make you depressed. You are coming with us today. I am not signing my home away today, I repeated, letting my hands tremble just slightly over my coffee mug. My brain is foggy. I cannot read legal documents right now. I just cannot do it. Derek shot Valerie a sharp warning look. He knew pushing a grieving man to sign away his assets less than a day after a funeral could look like coercion to a judge. He needed me compliant. Okay, Dad, Derek said smoothly, packing the papers back into the folder. We will not rush the signatures. Take a few days to clear your head. But Valerie is right about one thing. You should not be here alone right now. Go pack a few bags. Come stay in our basement suite for the weekend. Just let us take care of you for a few days. We can figure out the paperwork next week. It was a trap, of course. Once they got me out of the house, they would change the locks and start clearing out Martha's things. But I needed access to their world. I needed to know why they were in such a desperate rush for my money. And I needed to figure out what Martha's passbook code meant. All right, I muttered, staring at the table. I will pack a bag. Give me an hour. Valerie sighed heavily, rolling her eyes as if I had just asked her to carry boulders. Fine. Derek, you stay here and make sure he actually packs. I need to take a call for a listing. She grabbed her keys and walked out the front door, letting it slam shut behind her. I went upstairs to my bedroom and pulled out a small duffel bag. I packed a few shirts, some pants, and my shaving kit. I made absolutely sure the blue passbook was zipped securely into the inner pocket of my heavy canvas coat. I took my time methodically moving through the room, committing the space to memory. I knew deep down that leaving this house today meant I might be stepping onto a battlefield I could not easily walk away from. When I came back downstairs, Derek was standing in the kitchen, aggressively tapping his foot. Ready? He asked curtly, the fake empathy entirely gone now that Valerie was not in the room. Yes, I said. Let me just put this in the car. The trunk is open, Derek said, tossing me his car keys. I need to use the restroom before we hit the road. Make it quick. I walked out the front door into the biting wind. Derek's luxury sport utility vehicle was parked in my driveway, gleaming like a polished obsidian stone. The engine was already running, purring quietly, keeping the interior warm. I opened the heavy tailgate and tossed my duffel bag inside. As I closed the trunk, I walked around to the driver's side to leave the keys on the seat. I opened the heavy door. The dashboard screen was glowing brightly. Derek had left his personal cell phone resting on the center console, completely unlocked. Suddenly, the speakers in the expensive car crackled to life. My own cell phone, an old model Valerie had given me as a hand-me-down 2 years ago, was still paired to Derek's car system from a family road trip we took last Thanksgiving. But it was not my phone making the noise. The car's automated voice system spoke loudly in the enclosed space. New voicemail received at 8:14 a.m., the digital voice announced. Before I could step back, the message began to play through the car's surround sound speakers. The voice on the other end of the line was incredibly calm, heavy, and terrifyingly cold. "Derek," the man said. "This is Richard from Apex Capital. You are out of time. You missed the wire transfer again. We do not care about your father-in-law's house, and we do not care about your wife's real estate commissions. You owe us $2.5 million by next Friday. If the funds are not in the escrow account by close of business, we are seizing the Lincoln Park property, your company assets, and everything your name is attached to. Call me back immediately." The voicemail clicked off. The car fell completely silent save for the gentle hum of the engine. I stood frozen in the freezing wind, staring at the glowing dashboard screen. $2.5 million. Asset seizure. My son-in-law was not a successful finance executive managing a massive portfolio. He was a desperate, drowning man tethered to a massive, crushing debt. And suddenly, the entire morning made perfect, horrifying sense. They did not want me in their basement suite to take care of me. They needed my house, the property I had paid off 30 years ago with my own sweat and blood to save themselves from utter ruin. They needed to liquidate my entire life to pay off a ruthless creditor. I looked back toward my front door. Derek was inside, washing his soft, uncalloused hands, believing he had just successfully outsmarted a clueless, grieving old man. He thought I was his lifeline. He had absolutely no idea that he had just invited a wolf into his home. I quietly closed the car door, gripping my coat tight against the cold, feeling the solid edge of Martha's blue passbook against my chest. I knew right then with absolute certainty that I was going to tear his perfectly constructed, deceitful life completely apart. The drive to their sprawling suburban estate was suffocatingly quiet. I watched the familiar streets of my old neighborhood pass by. Soon those modest homes faded into the gated, manicured fortresses of the elite. I played my part flawlessly. I let my heavy shoulders slump forward, creating the illusion of utter defeat. I stared blankly at the pristine floor mats. I became the exact version of the broken, grieving widower they so desperately needed me to be. When we pulled up to their massive stone mansion, Derek hopped out and grabbed my single duffel bag with a sickeningly cheerful grin. He led me through the grand foyer, past a cascading crystal chandelier, and straight down into the basement. It was a beautifully finished suite, technically luxurious with recessed lighting, but it felt exactly like what it was. A gilded storage unit meant for an inconvenient old man. Valerie did not even come down to help me unpack. She simply yelled from the top of the stairs that dinner would be ordered in and that I should make myself comfortable. I sat on the edge of the stiff guest bed, listening to the heavy footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors above me. They thought they had secured their lifeline. They thought I was entirely oblivious to the ticking time bomb of their $2.5 million debt. I unpacked my shirts, slipping Martha's blue passbook underneath the heavy mattress for safekeeping. For the next 3 days, I observed them from the shadows of my basement cell. I watched how they lived, and it made the bile rise in my throat. Every single afternoon without fail, a steady parade of delivery trucks pulled up to the circular driveway. They unloaded boxes from high-end boutiques, expensive wine shipments, and imported furniture they absolutely did not need. They were bleeding money at a terrifying rate. At night, the doorbell rang with deliveries from the most expensive restaurants in the city. $500 sushi platters and prime steaks eaten off paper plates while they lounged on their velvet sofa. But beneath this glittering veneer of endless wealth, the ugly cracks were already showing. I saw Derek pacing the backyard patio, his phone glued to his ear. He looked haggard, his shoulders tight with panic. Every time his phone buzzed with an unknown number, he would jump, staring at the screen with absolute terror before hitting reject. He was dodging calls constantly. Valerie was equally on edge. She snapped at the delivery drivers, yelled at the landscaping crew, and drank 3 glasses of wine before the sun even went down. They were violently thrashing in an ocean of their own financial incompetence. Yet they refused to stop spending. It was a pathological sickness. They believed looking rich would somehow protect them from the reality of being completely broke. I kept my head down, waiting patiently for them to slip up. My perfect opportunity to accurately measure my son-in-law arrived on my fourth morning in the house. I was sitting at the small kitchenette table when I heard a sharp hissing sound, followed by a loud pop from the utility closet. A steady stream of water began pouring across the expensive laminate flooring. A main cold water supply valve had ruptured under the sudden pressure. I stepped out and watched the water pool. A minute later, Derek came rushing down the stairs, wearing a silk bathrobe, his eyes wide with panic. He saw the water and completely froze. He did not move toward the valve. He did not try to assess the damage. He just stood there, frantically tapping his phone screen, screaming at a plumbing dispatcher who told him no one could arrive for at least 3 hours. I walked past him, opened the closet door, and assessed the situation instantly. The brass pressure nut had simply vibrated loose. I grabbed an adjustable wrench from my duffel bag and knelt right into the freezing water. Derek watched me in silence as I locked the heavy steel wrench securely onto the brass fitting and pulled with the raw strength of 40 years of manual labor. The metal shrieked, then tightened. The spraying water stopped instantly. I stood up, wiping my wet, calloused hands on my jeans. Derek let out a breath he had been holding, looking at me with a mixture of relief and deep embarrassment. "Thanks, Dad," he muttered. He could not even meet my gaze. I nodded slowly, holding the heavy wrench in my hand. That was the moment I truly understood the fundamental difference between us. Derek knew how to manipulate spreadsheets. He knew how to leverage debt and sell empty promises. But he did not know how to build a single thing, and he certainly did not know how to fix a leak. These people were constructed out of paper. They only knew how to consume, how to take, and how to bleed things dry. When the foundation cracked, they had absolutely no idea how to hold the walls up. I spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning up the water, while Derek retreated upstairs to hide. I wrung out the towels and gathered the soggy trash from the utility bins. I carried the heavy black plastic bags up the side stairs and out to the industrial dumpsters by the garage. As I hoisted the bags over the rim, something caught my eye. The wind had blown the heavy lid of the recycling bin open. Inside, resting right on top of the discarded cardboard, was a pile of paper shavings. Derek had emptied his office paper shredder in a rush. Most people would have completely ignored it. But my eyes locked onto a small, intact corner of a cream-colored stationery that had escaped the blades. The paper quality was unmistakable. It was the heavy, watermarked stock used exclusively by high-net-worth financial institutions. I glanced carefully over my shoulder. The sprawling driveway was completely empty. Valerie was out, and Derek was upstairs hiding from his creditors. I reached into the recycling bin and scooped up as many of the shredded ribbons as my hands could hold. I shoved them deep into my pockets, closed the bin, and walked back down into the basement. I spread the paper noodles across the table. My construction days had taught me infinite patience. I sat under the dim light, methodically sorting the strips by the distinct blue ink of the bank logo. It took me nearly 3 hours to align the jagged edges. My back ached, and my eyes burned, but I did not stop until the top half of the document was fully reconstructed. I taped the pieces together and stared down at the result. My breathing stopped. The logo at the top was an ornate silver shield. Sterling Trust Bank. It was a premium invitation-only financial institution located in the wealthiest district of downtown Chicago. You did not get an account there unless you had millions in liquid assets. But the logo was not what made the room spin. It was the name printed boldly on the recipient line. The premium account statement detailing a massive, highly secure offshore financial trust was addressed directly to my wonderful, fiercely loyal late wife, Martha Jean Caldwell. Martha Jean Caldwell. I traced my calloused thumb over her printed name, staring at the taped pieces of paper until the sharp black letters began to blur. My Martha, who washed plastic bags just to save a few pennies. This humble woman had a premium account statement from Sterling Trust Bank. It did not make logical sense. Sterling Trust was not a bank for retired construction workers. It was an elite financial fortress exclusively for corporate executives, hiding massive wealth behind impenetrable offshore shielding. Yet here was her name printed in crisp indigo ink on expensive watermarked paper, pulled straight from the shredded trash of my slick son-in-law. I sat in the dim light of my basement cell, letting the dark reality wash over me. Derek had shredded this document to destroy evidence of a financial trust linked to my dead wife. My mind flashed back to the faded blue passbook hidden beneath my mattress, the one with the lipstick warning. Do not trust them. Save yourself. The jagged pieces were scattered, but I was starting to see the very sharp edges. I needed to know exactly how much Valerie knew about this betrayal. I folded the taped document and slipped it into the breast pocket of my old flannel shirt. I waited exactly 10 minutes after she got home, giving her just enough time to pour her evening glass of wine. Then I began my slow ascent up the basement stairs, letting my boots drag heavily against the wood to announce my arrival. I found her in the sprawling kitchen. She was leaning against the granite island, typing aggressively on her smartphone. I slumped my heavy shoulders, adopting the exact posture of a confused, grieving widower who had simply lost his way. I cleared my throat softly. Valerie looked up, her expression instantly hardening with absolute annoyance. "What is it, Dad?" she asked, not even bothering to put her phone down. I shuffled forward slowly, pulling the taped piece of paper from my pocket with intentionally trembling fingers. "I am sorry to bother you, sweetie," I said, making my rough voice sound thin and uncertain. "I was just taking out the trash like Derek asked, and the wind blew the recycling bin open. I saw this paper on the ground." I held the document out toward her. "Honey, why is a fancy downtown bank writing to your mother?" Valerie glanced casually at the paper. The exact moment her eyes registered the Silver Shield logo and the name Martha Jean Caldwell, the color completely drained from her face. I watched the blood leave her cheeks in an instant. Her contoured jaw went entirely slack. For a split second, the arrogant real estate broker vanished, replaced by a terrified criminal who had just been caught red-handed. Before I could even blink, she lunged forward and snatched the taped paper right out of my hand. Her manicured nails dug sharply into my palm. "What are you doing going through our trash?" she hissed, her voice rising an entire octave. "I did not go through the trash," I repeated softly, maintaining my bewildered facade perfectly. "It blew out. I just wanted to know why they were sending mail to Martha." Valerie crumpled the document in her fist, her knuckles turning stark white. She took a deep, shaky breath, trying to regain her composure. When she spoke again, her tone was dripping with that sickeningly sweet, patronizing patience people use when talking to a confused toddler. "Dad, you are completely misunderstanding this situation," she said smoothly. "It is just a predatory life insurance scam. You know exactly how these terrible companies operate in this city. They buy lists of recently deceased seniors and send out fake account statements to try and trick grieving family members into paying heavy administrative fees." Derek was furious when he saw it. That is exactly why he shredded it. He was just trying to protect you from seeing it and getting needlessly upset. I looked directly at her, studying the tiny bead of sweat forming at her left temple. I noted the rapid, shallow rise and fall of her chest. She was lying straight through her perfectly white teeth. I knew it. She knew I was testing her, but she desperately needed me to buy the lie. "It was a scam?" I asked, letting my voice waver precisely. "Yes, Dad," she insisted, stepping closer and placing a cold hand on my shoulder. "It is absolute garbage. You really need to stop digging around and letting your mind play tricks on you. Your grief is making you paranoid. Please just go back downstairs and rest. Leave the financial mail to Derek." She turned her back on me, tossing the crumpled paper directly into the kitchen garbage disposal and aggressively flipping the switch. The loud grinding noise of the heavy motor filled the quiet kitchen, utterly destroying my reconstructed evidence in mere seconds. I stood there watching her destroy the paper, and simply nodded. "Okay, Valerie," I whispered. "I am sorry. I will go rest now." I turned and walked slowly back to the basement door. I retreated to my cell, but there was absolutely no chance of sleep. The encounter had given me all the confirmation I needed. My daughter was fully complicit. They were working together, and my dead wife was right at the center of their desperate scheme. I sat in the dark waiting for the house to quiet down. Around midnight, I heard the front door close. Derek had finally returned home. I crept silently out of my room and moved down the short hallway to the small ground-level window that looked out onto the patio. Valerie and Derek were standing near the edge of the luxury swimming pool. Derek had completely lost his polished composure. He was pacing frantically across the expensive paving stones, both hands buried in his hair. Valerie was gesturing wildly, pointing toward the basement. Even through the thick glass, I could read the absolute panic etched into both of their faces. He was a man backed into a dangerous corner, running completely out of time to pay off his corporate debt. Valerie nodded aggressively, pulling something out of her pocket and shoving it into his chest. It was the rest of the mail. They stood there in the night air, realizing their perfect plan was unraveling. I stepped back from the window. My direct confrontation had rattled them. Panicked people always make catastrophic mistakes. I walked back to my small bed and slid my hand under the heavy mattress. My fingers brushed against the rough edge of the blue passbook. The lipstick code felt like a burning ember against my skin. The puzzle was almost complete. They had the offshore trust, the massive debt, and my forged signature. But they did not have this book. I knew with certainty that whatever they were hiding in that elite bank, this piece of paper was the only key. And tomorrow, I was going directly to the one place they never wanted me to go. The opportunity I desperately needed arrived the very next evening. Valerie and Derek were scheduled to attend a prestigious gala in downtown Chicago. I sat quietly on the edge of my bed in the basement room, listening to the muffled sounds of their frantic preparations echoing through the floorboards above me. I heard the aggressive click of Valerie's high heels pacing and the tense, hurried whispers exchanged between them. They were putting on their expensive armor. They were going out to sip premium champagne and shake hands with the city's financial elite, pretending they were not drowning in an ocean of debt. Derek knocked briefly on the heavy basement door before opening it just a fraction. "We are leaving, Dad," he called down the stairs, his voice tight and completely devoid of its usual slick charm. "There is leftover pasta in the refrigerator if you get hungry. Do not wait up for us tonight." I let out a weak, raspy cough and told him to have a wonderful time. I listened closely as the oak front door shut firmly, followed by the low rumble of Derek's luxury sport utility vehicle pulling out of the long driveway. The house finally fell into a deep, absolute silence. I waited 20 minutes to ensure they had not forgotten anything and turned back. Then I stood up and stretched my aching back, feeling my joints pop. I shed the fragile old man persona like a heavy winter coat. I walked over to my duffel bag, reached deep inside, and pulled out a small, worn leather pouch. Inside were a few specialized tools I had carried with me for over 40 years on the brutal construction sites of the city. A heavy tension wrench, a set of fine picks, and a flathead screwdriver with a chipped handle. I walked up the wooden basement stairs, my steps light, quiet, and fiercely deliberate. Derek's home office was located at the far end of the second-floor hallway. It was the only room in the entire mansion he kept locked at all times, treating it like an impenetrable fortress. I stood before the polished mahogany door and closely examined the locking mechanism. It was a modern deadbolt designed to keep out curious house guests and snooping cleaning staff. But it was absolutely no match for a man who had spent decades disassembling commercial-grade security systems on high-rise job sites. I slid the tension tool into the keyhole, applied a steady rotational pressure with my left thumb, and gently worked the pick with my right hand. I felt the internal mechanical pins click into place one by one. 5 seconds later, the heavy door swung open. I stepped inside the room and closed the door softly behind me, pulling the thick velvet curtains shut before turning on a small desk lamp. The office was a monument to Derek's inflated ego. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves held pristine unread volumes on market strategy and global economics. The massive glass desk in the center of the room was meticulously organized, completely free of any actual hard work. But I was not interested in his trophies or his carefully curated facade. My sharp eyes went straight to the heavy steel filing cabinet tucked discreetly in the corner of the room. It was a commercial-grade fireproof safe, the kind that required both an electronic combination and a physical skeleton key. Derek was an arrogant man, but he was also incredibly predictable. Men who obsess over their outward appearance usually lack the discipline to properly secure their internal messes. I knelt on the rug in front of the cabinet. I bypassed the electronic keypad entirely, locating the manual override panel hidden beneath a small plastic cover on the side. I wedged my flathead screwdriver into the tight seam, applying raw pressure until the plastic snapped off with a sharp crack. Using a modified piece of sturdy bent wire from my leather tool pouch, I engaged the internal locking latch directly. The heavy steel drawers unlocked with a loud, incredibly satisfying mechanical clunk. I pulled the bottom drawer open. It was packed tight with thick manila folders. I began pulling out the files, methodically scanning the labels under the dim light of the desk lamp. Most of them were routine client portfolios, empty corporate jargon, and convoluted tax shelter documents meant to confuse auditors. I kept digging aggressively, pushing aside the useless paperwork until my calloused fingers brushed against a thick red folder, tucked all the way at the very back of the drawer. The label, printed in bold black ink, read Caldwell Estate. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. I pulled the red folder out, placed it on the glass desk, and flipped it open. The first few pages were detailed offshore wire transfer logs. I traced the long columns of numbers with my rough index finger. Derek had been funneling massive sums of money out of his legitimate business accounts and secretly routing them through a complex maze of anonymous shell companies in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands. Millions of dollars were systematically disappearing into the dark without a single trace. Beneath the detailed wire logs was a complex bridge loan contract from a shadow lending firm called Apex Capital. It was the exact same ruthless company from the threatening voicemail I had heard in his car. The terms of the loan were absolutely predatory, carrying a staggering 25% interest rate with severe immediate default penalties. Derek had borrowed heavily against liquid assets he did not actually own, gambling with phantom money to desperately cover offshore losses. I kept reading, my jaw clenching tighter with every single page I turned. They had absolutely bled their own company completely dry, and now the financial sharks were violently circling the waters. But the final piece of the terrifying puzzle, the true depth of their sick betrayal, was hiding at the very bottom of the thick stack. I pulled out a heavy multiple-page legal document, printed on premium textured paper. It was a comprehensive corporate indemnity agreement. I quickly scanned the dense legal paragraphs, my eyes jumping over the convoluted financial terms until I reached the core stipulation. It was a binding personal guarantee unconditionally holding the signatory fully liable for $2 million in defaulted corporate debt. If Derek failed to pay the ruthless lenders, the creditors had the absolute legal right to seize the guarantor's assets, their bank accounts, their retirement investments, and their home. I turned to the very last page of the dense document. My breath caught sharply in my throat, and a cold, paralyzing dread washed entirely through my veins. Right there on the signature line, executed in flawless, unwavering blue ink, was the name Victor Caldwell. I just stared at the forged signature in absolute horror. The distinct loop of the V, the sharp, familiar angle of the C. It was a perfect, masterful forgery of my own handwriting. My own daughter and her slick, deceitful husband had entirely framed me. They were not just trying to take my house. They were throwing me directly to the vicious wolves to simply save themselves. I stood frozen in the dim light of Derek's office, the heavy paper trembling in my scarred hands. The forged signature burned into my eyes. Victor Caldwell. It was a masterpiece of deception. The sheer audacity of it completely robbed me of my breath. I placed the document back on the glass desk and began to trace the lines of the offshore wire transfer logs I had found just moments before. The horrifying picture finally snapped into perfect focus. Derek and Valerie were not just reckless spenders who had fallen behind on their mortgage. They were actively running a massive, highly sophisticated money laundering operation right out of my daughter's luxury real estate firm. They were using dummy corporations to purchase high-end properties, moving illicit cash through international accounts, and relying on shadow lenders to float their illegal transactions. But the bridge loan had failed. The money had disappeared into the offshore maze, and the ruthless lenders were demanding immediate repayment. And to protect their own comfortable, privileged lives from federal prison and violent creditors, my own flesh and blood had constructed a legal firewall. They had quietly signed me up to be the ultimate scapegoat. If the federal authorities came knocking, or if the shadow lenders decided to collect their debts by force, all the legal liability would fall squarely on my 70-year-old shoulders. They were going to sacrifice me to save their mansion, their imported cars, and their pristine social reputation. I sank into Derek's leather desk chair, feeling a cold ache open up in my chest. I thought about the rusted tin box. I thought about the faded blue passbook and the warning scrawled in bright red lipstick. How did Martha know? For 40 years, my wife was the quiet, unseen architect of our survival. While I spent 14 hours a day breaking my back, pouring concrete and hauling steel, Martha sat at our scratched kitchen table with her reading glasses resting on her nose. She managed our meager finances with absolute unforgiving precision. She kept every grocery receipt, balanced the checkbook down to the exact penny, and knew exactly where every single dollar we earned went. She never missed a cent. She was brilliant, meticulous, and incredibly observant. Valerie and Derek always treated her like a simple, naive housewife who knew nothing about the real world. They vastly underestimated her. Martha must have seen something. Perhaps she found a misplaced document when she came over to visit, or maybe she noticed a discrepancy in a tax form they asked us to sign last year. Whatever it was, her sharp mind had pulled the threads together. She had uncovered their sickening betrayal before her heart finally gave out. She realized that our daughter, the child we had sacrificed our entire youth to raise, was actively plotting to destroy us. That realization must have shattered her completely. It probably contributed to the sudden massive heart attack that took her from me. She had used her final days to secure that blue passbook and leave me a desperate warning. Do not trust them. Save yourself. The anger that washed over me then was not hot or explosive. It was a freezing, absolute zero rage that settled deep into my bones. My instinct. The instinct of a man who had spent his life solving problems head-on was to march directly down to the patio, shove this forged document right into Derek's arrogant face, and demand a full confession. I wanted to drag Valerie into the light and ask her how she could possibly look her mother in the eye while setting us up for absolute ruin. But I forced myself to remain completely still. I took a slow, deep breath, reining in the fury that was threatening to consume my logic. If I confronted them tonight, I would lose everything. Derek was a master manipulator, and Valerie was a seasoned liar. If they knew I had breached the filing cabinet, they would instantly destroy the paper trail. They would shred the offshore logs, burn the indemnity agreement, and deny absolutely everything. They would gaslight me, call the authorities, and claim that my grief had driven me completely insane. Without this specific folder, I had absolutely no tangible proof. I was just an old retired construction worker pointing fingers at a wealthy, respected corporate executive. The police would look at my calloused hands and my worn-out boots, then look at Derek's tailored suits and Valerie's elegant tears. They would never believe me. I would be arrested for the $2 million debt, and I would spend the remainder of my days rotting away in a sterile concrete federal cell. I would die in prison while the people who put me there lived comfortably on the money they stole from my life's work. I was definitely not going to let that terrible nightmare happen. I refused to be a casualty of their boundless greed. I carefully picked up the corporate indemnity agreement with the forged signature. I folded it precisely in half, then in quarters, and slid it deep into the inner pocket of my flannel shirt, right next to where I kept Martha's blue passbook. I reorganized the remaining files in the drawer, making absolutely sure the offshore wire logs and the shadow loan contracts were positioned exactly as I had found them. I closed the heavy steel drawer of the filing cabinet, turning the manual locking latch until I heard the satisfying solid clunk of the mechanism engaging. I replaced the broken plastic cover, smoothing it down so it looked completely undisturbed. I wiped down the glass desk with my sleeve, ensuring I left no fingerprints behind. I turned off the small desk lamp, plunged the room back into total darkness, and quietly pulled the heavy mahogany door shut, feeling the deadbolt click securely into place. As I walked silently back down the carpeted stairs to my basement room, my mind was running through the logistics of a war I never wanted to fight. They thought they had the upper hand because they believed I was entirely ignorant. They thought my love for my daughter would permanently blind me to her staggering cruelty. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had underestimated a man who spent his life studying structural integrity. I knew exactly how to find the weakest load-bearing pillar in a foundation, and I knew exactly how to strike it to bring the entire building crashing down. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, pulling the blue passbook from my pocket. I traced my rough thumb over the gleaming silver shield logo of Sterling Trust Bank that I had painstakingly pieced together from the shredded household garbage. Tomorrow morning, while Derek and Valerie were nursing their hangovers and pretending to be respectable citizens, I was going to take a trip downtown. I was going to walk right through the heavy glass front doors of that highly exclusive elite financial institution. I was going to find out exactly what my brilliant wife had hidden behind that lipstick code, and I was going to strike the first devastating blow. The early morning sun pierced the basement window when I heard heavy footsteps across the kitchen floor above me. Derek and Valerie were awake, likely nursing hangovers from their gala. I moved quietly, opening my duffel bag to retrieve the item I had packed hidden from their view. It was my only decent suit, a charcoal two-piece I bought a decade ago for a funeral. It was slightly loose on my frame now, but I brushed the lint from the lapels and adjusted the tie. I slipped the forged corporate indemnity agreement into the inside breast pocket, patting the fabric to ensure the heavy blue passbook was resting securely next to it. I climbed the wooden stairs, making my breathing sound labored and heavy as I opened the door to the kitchen. Valerie was hunched over the marble island, gripping a mug of black coffee. She barely glanced in my direction. I kept my voice weak, telling her I scheduled a routine doctor's appointment downtown to check my blood pressure. She waved a dismissive hand, not bothering to ask how I was getting there. Derek did not look up from his tablet. They were completely oblivious to the fact that their carefully constructed scapegoat was walking right out their front door. I walked 3 blocks down the quiet suburban street before ordering a ride. I was not going to let them track my movements through Derek's expensive luxury vehicles. The driver was completely quiet, allowing me to sit back and watch the transition from the pristine suburbs to the towering steel and glass canyons of downtown Chicago. The city moved with frantic energy. I felt the weight of the blue passbook against my chest. Martha had left me a detailed map, and I was walking directly into the territory she secretly navigated. The car pulled up to the curb on LaSalle Street, stopping in front of an imposing skyscraper that seemed to swallow the morning light. I stepped out onto the busy pavement, tipping the driver and buttoning my suit jacket against the brisk wind. There, etched in massive polished silver lettering across a sheer slab of black granite, was the name: Sterling Trust Bank. It did not look like a standard place that handled checking accounts. It looked like a modern fortress guarded by heavy revolving doors, and men in dark suits standing motionless near the entrance. I adjusted my posture, rolling my shoulders back and lifting my chin. I was no longer the broken widower playing a part in a basement. I was a man seeking the absolute truth. I walked through the heavy revolving doors, stepping into a vast, cavernous lobby that echoed with the hushed, expensive whispers of the financial elite. The floors were cut from seamless white marble gleaming under the warm, recessed lighting. Abstract art hung on the walls, and the air smelled faintly of lemon and expensive leather. There were no teller lines, no velvet ropes, and certainly no deposit slips scattered on counters. Instead, there were sleek individual mahogany desks spaced far apart for absolute client privacy. I walked purposefully toward the nearest available representative. She was a young woman wearing a sharp navy suit and a string of pearls. Her eyes flicked up as I approached, instantly sweeping over my outdated faded charcoal suit, my calloused hands, and the scuffed toes of my leather shoes. A tight, condescending smile immediately formed on her lips. She had instantly categorized me as a lost vagrant who wandered through the wrong doors. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice dripping with polished impatience. "This is a private invitation-only wealth management firm. I believe you might be looking for the commercial retail bank located 3 blocks down the street. We do not process standard transactions here." I did not say a single word. I reached into the breast pocket of my suit, pulled out Martha's blue passbook, and slapped it down firmly onto the mahogany desk. The heavy thud echoed sharply in the quiet space. The teller stared down at the worn blue cover, as if I had placed a live explosive on her desk. "Sir, I do not know what that is," she started to say, reaching out to slide the book back toward me. I placed my large, scarred hand firmly over the passbook, stopping her completely. "Open it," I demanded, letting the gravel and absolute authority in my voice completely override her polished dismissal. She looked at my face, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, and slowly pulled her hand back. She flipped the worn cover open, her eyebrows knit together in utter confusion as she stared at the bright red lipstick numbers scrawled across the yellowed page. "This is meaningless," she whispered, her polite facade cracking. I leaned forward, resting both my hands on the edge of the mahogany desk, and looked her directly in the eyes. I recited the string of numbers exactly as Martha had written them, letting each digit hang heavily in the quiet air. 7, 4, 2, 9, 0, 1. Alpha. The young woman swallowed hard, clearly unsettled by my unwavering intensity. She turned her attention to her dual computer monitors, her manicured fingers flying across the sleek, silent keyboard. She typed the sequence into her secure internal system and hit the enter key. I watched her face closely. In the span of a single second, her annoyance completely vanished, replaced by an expression of pure shock. The blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking absolutely terrified. She froze, her hands hovering above the keyboard, her eyes locked on the glowing screen. She did not speak. She did not ask me another question. She slowly lowered her hand beneath the mahogany desk. I spent enough time on commercial job sites to know what a silent panic alarm looked like when it was triggered. Within 10 seconds, the atmosphere in the lobby drastically changed. I heard the sharp sound of heavy footsteps approaching from behind me. I glanced over my shoulder and saw 3 large security guards in dark suits moving swiftly across the marble floor, completely flanking my position. They did not look like bank guards. They moved with tactical, aggressive precision, their hands resting cautiously near their hips. I stood my ground, my hand firmly planted on Martha's passbook. Suddenly, a heavy oak door at the far end of the lobby swung open with violent force. A distinguished man in his late 50s rushed out. He was dressed in a tailored pinstripe suit, but his face was pale, covered in a thin sheen of nervous sweat. He ran across the marble floor, waving a trembling hand at the approaching security guards to halt their advance. They stopped instantly, forming a tight perimeter around my desk. The man approached me, gasping for breath. He looked down at the passbook, then at my face. His eyes were wide with a terror that mirrored the teller's reaction. "Mr. Caldwell," he breathed, his voice shaking with absolute dread. "My name is Harrison Reed. I am the managing director of this branch. Please, I beg of you, step into my private office immediately. We are calling the FBI." I did not flinch as the heavy wooden doors of the private office closed behind us, shutting out the murmurs of the stunned lobby. Harrison Reed collapsed into his high-backed leather chair, pulling a pristine linen handkerchief from his pocket to furiously wipe the sweat beading across his forehead. His luxurious office was a fortress of mahogany and smoked glass overlooking the sprawling skyline of the financial district. But right now, the powerful branch manager looked like a terrified child. He stared at the blue passbook in my hands, as if it were highly radioactive. I walked forward slowly and placed the worn book squarely in the center of his immaculate desk. I did not sit down. I stood towering over him, letting my physical presence fill the room. The absolute silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. "You mentioned the authorities," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low and completely steady. "You also looked like you had seen a ghost when my wife's security code went through your system." "I am a patient man, Mr. Reed, but my patience evaporated the moment those guards surrounded me. You are going to tell me exactly what is in that account, and you are going to tell me right now." Harrison swallowed hard, his throat bobbing against his tight silk collar. He tapped a frantic sequence into his desktop terminal, turning the monitor slightly so he could read the glowing text. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely type. "Mr. Caldwell," he began, his voice cracking slightly, "I need you to understand that Sterling Trust takes client confidentiality very seriously. However, the internal flag on this specific account was placed by federal regulators 3 weeks ago. We were explicitly instructed to contact the authorities the absolute second anyone attempted to access these funds using the analog passbook override." I kept my eyes locked on his pale, sweating face. "I am not leaving this room until I know what my wife was holding in your vault," I demanded. "Tell me the number." Harrison let out a shaky breath, glancing nervously toward the heavy oak doors before looking back at his screen. "The current liquid balance of the trust registered to Martha Jean Caldwell is exactly $4.8 million, he whispered, as if saying the number too loudly might trigger an explosion. The amount hung in the quiet air, heavy and entirely incomprehensible. $4.8 million. I felt a cold shockwave travel down my spine, but I refused to let my expression shift. My Martha, who clipped grocery coupons and worried about the winter heating bill, had a fortune sitting in a downtown skyscraper. I leaned closer to the desk, pressing my knuckles into the cold glass. "Where did that kind of money come from?" I asked, demanding the rest of the agonizing truth. Harrison wiped his forehead again, his eyes darting across the detailed financial logs on his screen. It did not originate from a legitimate corporate payroll or standard investments. He explained, his voice dropping into an urgent whisper. The deposits began filtering into the trust roughly 2 years ago. They were structured in highly specific increments, completely designed to avoid standard banking alerts. The funds were routed through a massive web of offshore shell companies located in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands. I stood perfectly still, letting the terrifying reality wash over me. The shredded offshore wire transfer logs I had found in the basement finally made absolute horrifying sense. Derek was using his high-end real estate firm to launder millions of dollars, moving illicit cash through ghost properties. But I needed to know exactly how they had dragged Martha into their toxic financial trap. Who authorized these specific transfers? I asked, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. Harrison tapped another key, bringing up the origin signatures. The funds were wired through a corporate entity named Apex Capital, he said, visibly cringing at the name. But the originating deposits were consistently signed off by your son-in-law, Derek Lawson, using a power of attorney document that your late wife allegedly authorized. The money was being aggressively washed through Valerie's real estate firm, categorized as anonymous foreign property investments, and then quietly funneled directly into this hidden trust. Harrison paused, looking at me with a mixture of profound pity and deep terror. Mr. Caldwell, this is an incredibly sophisticated money laundering syndicate. Apex Capital is currently under a massive federal investigation for financing shadow operations. When your son-in-law defaulted on a bridge loan with them recently, the regulators froze this entire trust. Your wife was not the mastermind. She was the firewall. They set her up to hold the illegal funds, shielding their own personal accounts from federal scrutiny. The freezing rage in my chest solidified into something entirely unbreakable. Derek and Valerie had deliberately turned Martha into a criminal scapegoat. They had manipulated her, probably tricking her into signing documents under the guise of helping their business. When she discovered the actual truth, the sheer stress and heartbreak of realizing her own daughter was framing her for a federal crime must have been the fatal blow that stopped her heart. And once she was gone, they had panicked. They desperately needed the funds in this account to pay off their aggressive creditors, but they were locked out because Martha had secretly secured the passbook and changed the final access code before she died. They were trapped, and so they had simply pivoted their malicious strategy. They had forged my signature on the corporate indemnity agreement to pass the crushing debt entirely onto me. They were fully prepared to let me take the fall for everything. I took a deep, steadying breath, processing the sheer magnitude of their sickening betrayal. I reached out and slowly picked up the blue passbook from the glass desk, sliding it safely back into the inside pocket of my charcoal suit. I looked at Harrison Reed, who was gripping the edges of his desk, as if bracing for a sudden impact. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Reed," I said quietly. "I believe I have heard absolutely everything I need to know. I am going to step out now." Before I could even pivot my heavy boots toward the exit, the massive oak doors of the private office suddenly swung open with tremendous force. The thick wood slammed loudly against the pristine drywall. Two towering men in identical dark suits stepped directly into the room, their postures completely rigid and authoritative. They did not look like corporate bankers or private wealth managers. The lead man flashed a solid gold badge attached securely to his belt. He stared directly into my eyes, his expression devoid of any human warmth. I stood my ground, utterly refusing to show even a single ounce of fear or weakness. "I am Federal Agent Thomas Riley," he announced, his deep voice commanding the entire space. He took one final, highly deliberate step toward me, completely blocking the single exit. He gestured toward the pocket, holding the blue passbook. "Victor Caldwell," he stated firmly. "You have a lot of explaining to do." The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind Agent Thomas Riley, sealing the private bank office in a thick, suffocating tension. Harrison Reed sat frozen behind his mahogany desk, utterly paralyzed by the sudden arrival of federal law enforcement. I did not move. I did not blink. I kept my posture completely rigid, staring directly into the steely gaze of the federal agent who had just accused me of orchestrating a massive financial crime. Riley walked slowly toward the center of the room, his dark suit absorbing the soft light. He pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt and placed them deliberately on the pristine glass surface of the desk. It was a silent, calculated threat designed to break my resolve. "You are holding a passbook tied directly to a frozen offshore trust containing nearly $5 million in laundered currency," Riley said, his voice echoing sharply off the paneled walls. "That money is the direct result of a vast criminal enterprise involving shell corporations, fraudulent real estate transactions, and illegal bridge loans from shadow lenders. Right now, Victor, you are the only person holding the physical key to that vault." I stood my ground, my calloused hands resting calmly at my sides. "I am a retired construction foreman, Agent Riley. I poured concrete for 40 years. I do not know the first thing about offshore trusts or shadow lenders." Riley let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "Do not play the confused senior citizen with me, Caldwell. We have been tracking the financial bleeding from Apex Capital for over 8 months. We followed the digital breadcrumbs right to this specific institution. We flagged this account weeks ago, waiting to see who would be arrogant enough to walk through those front doors and claim the cash. And here you are, dressed in your Sunday best, reciting a biometric security code." He stepped closer, invading my personal space. "The operation is over, Victor. We know exactly how you did it. You used your daughter's high-end real estate firm as a legitimate front to wash dirty money. You funneled the illicit cash into a hidden trust registered under your deceased wife's name to completely evade federal tax scrutiny. It was a brilliant, highly insulated strategy, using your own family members as disposable shields. But you got greedy, and your shadow creditors ran out of patience. The sheer audacity of his accusation made my blood run entirely cold. He actually believed that I was the criminal mastermind. He believed that I had manipulated my own daughter and deliberately tarnished the sacred name of my dead wife to hide stolen millions. The freezing rage that had been brewing inside me since I opened Derek's filing cabinet finally boiled over into a righteous, unyielding fury. I squared my shoulders, shedding any remaining trace of the broken widower they all expected me to be. "You listen to me," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous gravel that made even Agent Riley pause. My wife, Martha, was the most honest, decent woman to ever walk the streets of this city. She pinched pennies to buy groceries. She wore shoes until the soles wore out. She never took a single dishonest dime in her entire 68 years of life. Do not ever disrespect her memory by suggesting she was a willing participant in this filth. Riley crossed his arms, his expression hardening into a wall of skepticism. "The money is in her name, Victor. The paperwork trail leads directly to your household. You can act offended all you want, but the financial documents tell a very different story. We have the legal filings, we have the corporate structure, and we have a binding personal guarantee holding you absolutely liable for a $2 million default loan with Apex Capital. You are the sole guarantor." I held his gaze without flinching. "Yes, you have a guarantee with my name on it. But you do not have the truth." I slowly reached my rough hand toward the inner breast pocket of my charcoal suit. Riley instantly tensed, dropping his right hand toward his holstered weapon. I moved with deliberate, exaggerated slowness, making sure he could see exactly what I was doing. I slid my fingers past Martha's blue passbook and gripped the heavy, folded parchment paper I had carefully extracted from the depths of my son-in-law's locked filing cabinet the night before. I pulled the corporate indemnity agreement out of my jacket, unfolded it methodically, and tossed it flat onto the glass desk right next to Riley's steel handcuffs. "Read it," I commanded. Riley looked at the document, then back at me, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. He leaned over the desk and scanned the dense legal paragraphs. He recognized the specific shadow lending contract immediately. He flipped to the final signature page, his eyes locking onto the name Victor Caldwell, written in sharp blue ink. "I see your signature," Riley said flatly. "You just handed me a signed confession. You legally bound yourself to the criminal debt. Look closer, Agent Riley. Look at the pressure of the pen. Look at the angle of the letters. I am a left-handed man who spent 40 years gripping vibrating power tools. I have severe arthritis in my thumb and a permanent tremor in my wrist. I have not written a perfectly smooth, flowing signature in over 2 decades. Riley leaned in, his forensic training kicking in, as he closely examined the blue ink. The lines were indeed flawless, executed with the confident, sweeping motion of a much younger hand. I picked the lock on my son-in-law's steel filing cabinet this morning. I continued, my voice steady. I found a thick red folder labeled Caldwell Estate buried at the back. Inside were detailed offshore wire transfer logs routing millions through Cyprus. There were documents linking Valerie's real estate firm directly to Apex Capital. And at the bottom of the stack, I found that exact document. A fraudulent personal guarantee designed specifically to shift the entirety of their massive criminal liability onto my shoulders. "They are dodging aggressive creditors," I told him. "They used my wife as a disposable firewall. When Martha died, the trust was locked. They panicked. They forged my signature to buy themselves more time. They were fully prepared to throw me to the federal authorities just to save their mansion and their imported cars. I am not your mastermind agent. I am their carefully constructed scapegoat. The heavy silence in the office returned. Riley lowered the paper, his entire demeanor changing. The aggressive federal agent vanished, replaced by a calculating operator. He looked at me truly, looking at me for the first time. Mr. Caldwell, we have been building a comprehensive RICO case against Derek and Valerie for months, he said quietly. But we lacked hard internal digital evidence. Their ledgers are heavily encrypted. He stepped closer, his eyes intensely focused. We need a Trojan horse victor, someone inside their house to download their encrypted ledgers. If you help us, you walk free and keep your life. Are you in? I looked at him and agreed without a single hesitation. Riley did not offer a comforting smile. He operated with the exact cold, calculated efficiency I required. He reached into his suit jacket and produced a matte black thumb drive no larger than a house key. It looked ordinary, but Riley assured me it contained military-grade extraction software. It was designed to bypass Derek's firewall, locate the encrypted ledger files, and vanish without leaving a digital fingerprint. My instructions were agonizingly simple. Plug it in, wait for the green light to flash solid, remove it, and walk away. I carefully took the small drive from his extended hand. It felt incredibly light in my deeply calloused palm, yet it carried the heavy weight of a federal indictment. Riley quickly gave me a highly secure drop location for the following morning. We synchronized our watches, and I walked out of Sterling Trust Bank. I was no longer a grieving widower fighting for his home. I was a tactical asset inside an active federal racketeering investigation. The afternoon sun was sinking below the Chicago skyline by the time I took a cab back to the sprawling suburban mansion. I stood at the end of the manicured driveway and took a deep, steadying breath. I had to bury the righteous fury burning inside my chest. I had to smother the pride of a man who had built his life on honest sweat. For the next 12 hours, I had to be exactly what Valerie and Derek believed me to be. A frail, broken, entirely useless old man. I dragged my heavy work boots against the paving stones, forcing my shoulders to slump. I opened the massive oak front door with trembling hands. The house was excessively warm, smelling of catered garlic and expensive wine. Valerie was sitting in the grand living room, her perfectly tailored legs crossed elegantly over the arm of a velvet sofa. She was holding a crystal wine glass and staring aggressively at her smartphone. When she heard the door shut, her head snapped up. Her eyes narrowed into sharp, judgmental slits. She did not ask how my doctor appointment went. She simply looked at her platinum wristwatch and let out a harsh, theatrical sigh. "You have been gone for 6 hours, Dad," she snapped, her voice dripping with sheer annoyance. "I had to cancel a property showing because I thought you had wandered off and gotten lost downtown. You cannot just vanish without leaving a note. We are busy people. We do not have time to babysit you every single minute of the day." I forced my jaw to relax. I let my hands shake just a fraction of an inch. "I am sorry, Valerie," I muttered, making my voice sound thin and utterly defeated. "The bus was running late. I did not mean to worry you." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "Just go down to the basement," she commanded, waving her hand dismissively. "Derek is upstairs handling an absolute crisis with his accounting department, and I have a raging headache. Actually, before you go down there, bring me a glass of iced water with lemon, and make sure you actually wipe the counter this time." A cold, violent urge gripped the back of my neck. My own daughter, a woman whose college tuition was paid for by the permanent damage. In my spine was treating me like an incompetent servant. I knew she had forged my signature to sacrifice me to violent creditors. I knew she had driven her mother to an early grave. I wanted to tear the wine glass from her hand and shatter it against the marble floor. Instead, I swallowed my pride. It tasted like ash, but I choked it down. I nodded meekly, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor. "Yes, sweetheart," I whispered. "I will get your water right now." I walked into the gleaming kitchen. I pulled a crystal tumbler from the cabinet. I filled it with ice and water, slicing a lemon wedge with absolute methodical precision. I placed the glass on a silver coaster and carried it back into the living room. I set it gently on the table beside her. She simply grunted a vague acknowledgement. I turned my back on the criminal, who shared my blood, and shuffled slowly down the wooden stairs to my basement cell. I closed the door and sat in the dark. The time for anger had passed. Now it was strictly about execution. The hours dragged on with agonizing slowness. I lay fully clothed on top of the stiff guest bed, listening to the house settle. At 9 o'clock, Derek came downstairs. He paced the kitchen floor, opening and closing cabinet doors with aggressive force. I could hear his muffled voice arguing viciously on a phone call. The shadow lenders were tightening the noose. At 11 o'clock, the fighting between Derek and Valerie started. Sharp, venomous insults echoed down the hallway. By midnight, the shouting finally ceased, replaced by the heavy thud of a bedroom door slamming shut. I did not move. Patience is a weapon most people simply do not possess. I waited for the deep, rhythmic silence that only comes when a house is entirely asleep. I watched the glowing digital numbers on my cheap phone change. 1:30, 1:45. At exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, I sat up. I retrieved the black USB drive from my pocket, gripping it tightly in my palm. I slipped out of my heavy boots, standing only in my thick woolen socks. I opened the basement door. The hinges were silent. I climbed the stairs, placing my weight on the extreme edges of the wooden treads to prevent any groaning from the old wood. I moved through the grand foyer like a phantom. I reached the second-floor landing. The master bedroom door was firmly shut. I approached the heavy mahogany door of Derek's private office. I pulled my specialized tension wrench and flathead pick from my pocket. My hands did not tremble. The frail old man was gone. I slid the tools into the deadbolt mechanism. I applied rotational pressure and picked the pins in rapid fluid succession. The lock yielded with a soft click. I slipped inside the office and closed the door soundlessly behind me. The pale moonlight filtering through the tall windows provided just enough illumination. I walked straight to Derek's sleek laptop sitting squarely on the glass desk. I lifted the screen. The machine woke instantly, demanding a password. Riley had planned for this. The FBI software did not require network access. It was a brute force extraction tool designed to bypass the operating system entirely. I found the hidden data port on the side of the machine and inserted the black thumb drive. The screen flickered violently, cutting to a stark black terminal. Green code scrolled at blinding speed. A small status bar appeared, 20%, 40%. The download was massive. Illicit corporate ledgers were draining into my hand. 60%. Suddenly, a sharp noise cut through the absolute silence. A heavy floorboard creaked loudly right outside the mahogany door. Someone was walking slowly down the carpeted hallway, heading directly toward the office. The progress bar glowing on the screen held my entire focus. 65%. The heavy floorboard out in the hallway groaned again. The sound was distinct, pressing through the thick mahogany door. Someone was walking with purposeful, angry strides directly toward the office. I kept my hand hovering inches from the black thumb drive. Every instinct I had forged over 40 years of surviving hazardous construction sites screamed at me to pull the device and vanish into the shadows. But Agent Riley had been absolutely clear. If I removed the military-grade extraction software before the sequence fully compiled, the encryption protocols would instantly lock down the entire hard drive, alerting Derek to the breach and destroying our only chance at securing the digital ledgers. I had to hold my ground. 75%. The footsteps grew louder, muffled by the expensive runner carpet, but vibrating through the floor joists. It was not Derek. His steps were heavy and flat. These steps were sharp, rhythmic, and aggressive. It was Valerie. She was pacing the upper floor, likely searching for a specific document to put out whichever financial fire was currently burning down their illegal empire. 80%. The small green indicator light on the drive blinked with agonizing slowness. I held my breath, letting the absolute silence of the room amplify the beating of my own heart. I calculated the distance between the desk and the door. I calculated the time it would take for her to reach the brass handle. 85%. A shadow passed beneath the narrow gap at the bottom of the door, briefly blocking the ambient light from the hallway sconces. She had stopped right outside. 90%. I could hear the faint rustle of her silk robe as she shifted her weight. She was standing right there, separated from me by 2 inches of solid wood. I did not move a single muscle. I stared at the screen, willing the data to flow faster. 95%. The heavy brass doorknob began to turn. I watched the metal rotate counterclockwise with a sharp mechanical squeak. The lock I had picked earlier offered absolutely no resistance. She was coming in. 98%. The door cracked open, sending a sliver of pale yellow light cutting across the dark carpet. 99%. The green light on the drive flared brilliant and solid. Complete. I gripped the small plastic casing and yanked the drive forcefully from the port. I shoved the device deep into the front pocket of my trousers, concealing it entirely, just as the heavy door swung fully inward. I had no time to dive behind the sofa. I had no time to hide in the shadows. I had only one desperate option left to explain why I was standing in Derek's restricted office in the dead of night. I used the only weapon I had left in my arsenal, my perceived frailty. I threw my weight forward and dropped my knees violently onto the hardwood floor, letting out a sharp, ragged gasp. I collapsed onto my side, clutching the center of my chest with both hands. I curled my body inward, pulling my knees toward my stomach, simulating the exact horrifying symptoms of a severe cardiac episode. I closed my eyes and vividly recalled the terrifying morning I lost Martha. I channeled that raw, visceral panic directly into my physical performance. I let a wet, guttural groan rip through my throat, forcing my breathing to become shallow and incredibly rapid. I clawed at the fabric of my shirt, twisting the material in my fist, as if my heart were actively failing. I writhed on the floor, kicking my legs weakly against the base of the heavy glass desk. I portrayed a 70-year-old man facing his absolute end. Valerie stepped into the office, bathed in the sharp light spilling from the hallway. She looked down at me, writhing on the floor. I waited for the gasp. I waited for her to drop whatever she was holding and rush to my side. I waited for the frantic scramble to grab her smartphone and dial the emergency services. I waited for the fundamental biological panic of a daughter witnessing her father dying right in front of her eyes. I waited, but absolutely nothing happened. There was no scream. There was no rush of adrenaline. There was only a cold, heavy sigh of profound annoyance. Valerie stood perfectly still, looking down at my gasping, trembling body, as if I were a spilled glass of wine ruining her expensive rug. Her face, illuminated by the desk lamp I had knocked over, was a mask of utter detachment. She did not reach for her phone. She did not kneel down to check my pulse. She simply crossed her arms over her chest. "For God's sake, Dad, stop being so dramatic," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of a single ounce of empathy, completely empty of any human warmth. "You're having a panic attack because you forgot where you are. Take your pills and go back to the basement. You are giving me a massive headache." I continued to gasp, letting a strained wheeze escape my lips, playing the role to its absolute limit, to see exactly how dark her soul had truly become. I reached a trembling hand out toward her ankle, a silent, desperate plea for help. She actively stepped back, pulling her silk robe away from my grasping fingers with a look of sheer disgust. She did not just ignore my suffering. She stepped directly over my writhing body. Her bare heel nearly clipped my shoulder as she bypassed me entirely. She walked straight to the mahogany bookshelf on the far wall, pulled a thick leather portfolio from the bottom shelf, and tucked it under her arm. She turned around, stepped right back over my legs, and walked toward the exit. "Do not leave the lights on when you finally decide to get up," she commanded without looking back. She stepped out into the hallway and pulled the heavy mahogany door shut behind her. The lock clicked securely into place. Her sharp footsteps faded away down the corridor, leaving me completely alone in the dark. I stopped gasping. My breathing slowed, returning to a steady, calm rhythm. I uncurled my legs and lay flat on my back against the cold, hardwood floor. I stared up at the dark ceiling, letting the chilling reality of the last 2 minutes sink deep into my bones. The performance was over. The desperate, trembling old man evaporated into the cold air. My daughter had looked at me, fully believing I was having a fatal heart attack, and she had stepped over my dying body to fetch a piece of paper. She would have let me die right there on the floor. She would have stepped over my corpse to save her criminal empire. Any lingering trace of paternal hesitation, any small foolish shred of hope that she could be saved was permanently extinguished in that exact moment. The emotional bond between a father and his child was dead. I sat up slowly, my joints aching, but my mind was sharper and colder than it had ever been in my entire life. I reached into my pocket and closed my fingers around the hard matte plastic of the FBI thumb drive. I had the digital ledgers. I had the offshore accounts. I had the absolute proof of their staggering betrayal. I stood up in the quiet dark, completely detached and fiercely resolved. The trap was perfectly set. The morning air was razor sharp, carrying the bitter chill of a city that never forgave weakness. I slipped out through the heavy side door of the mansion long before the sun even considered rising. I did not take a coat. The freezing wind cutting through my thin flannel shirt was a necessary grounding force, a harsh reminder that I was still alive while my daughter actively waited for me to stop breathing. I walked 2 miles in the freezing dark, my boots hitting the pavement in a steady, relentless rhythm. I carried the black thumb drive in my pocket. It felt heavier now, weighted with the absolute ruin of the family I had broken my back to build. Agent Riley had chosen an incredibly bleak location for the handoff. It was an abandoned industrial park on the absolute outskirts of the city limits, a place where rusted fences and shattered concrete dominated the landscape. When I arrived, a black sedan idled near a decaying warehouse wall, the exhaust plumed thick and white in the freezing air. Riley stepped out of the passenger side as I approached. He did not offer a polite greeting. He did not ask about the horrifying reality of what I had survived in that house. He simply extended his gloved hand. I reached into my pocket and placed the black plastic drive squarely into his palm. He nodded once, sharp and professional, before gesturing for me to get into the back of the vehicle. I slid onto the cold leather seat. The interior of the car was completely dominated by a pale blue light emitting from a bank of rugged laptops mounted in the front. A young federal agent was furiously typing across a specialized keyboard. Riley climbed into the passenger seat and handed the drive over. The silence in the car was absolute, broken only by the rapid, aggressive clicking of the keys. I sat in the back, staring out the tinted window at the rusted fences. I thought about the sheer coldness of my daughter. I thought about the sheer coldness of her eyes. I thought about the sheer coldness of her heart. I had watched her step over my writhing body. She had stepped over my dying body. She had stepped over my pleading hands. That brutal image played on a continuous loop in my mind. It was a dark, obsessive repetition of pain that entirely severed any remaining threads of paternal affection. She was no longer my child. She was a hostile entity that needed to be dismantled. "We have penetration," the younger agent announced, his voice devoid of any emotion. "The decryption protocols are slicing through the corporate firewall. It is a massive data dump." Riley leaned forward, his eyes locking onto the cascading lines of digital information flooding the main monitor. I watched the reflection of the data dancing across his dark eyes. It took 45 minutes for the software to map out the infected architecture of my son-in-law's financial empire. When the progress bar finally hit 100%, Riley let out a low, deeply cynical whistle. He turned around to face me, his expression grave. "Victor," he started, his voice a low gravel. You are looking at the digital anatomy of a $4.8 million lie. Derek and Valerie did not just borrow money from shadow lenders. They have been running a highly sophisticated predatory Ponzi scheme disguised as an elite real estate investment fund. I kept my expression completely flat, absorbing the blows as they came. Tell me the exact mechanics, I demanded. I want to know exactly how they used my wife. Riley tapped the glowing screen, bringing up a complex flowchart of offshore accounts and wire transfers. They were actively siphoning massive deposits from their high-net-worth real estate investors, he explained methodically. They routed the clean money through a labyrinth of shell companies in Cyprus. They needed a secure domestic resting place to park the capital where federal auditors would never look. They needed an identity entirely disconnected from the corporate world. They needed a ghost. They stole Martha's identity, I stated, feeling the bitter acid rise in my throat. Worse, Riley said, his eyes narrowing with deep disgust. They did not just steal her identity, they legally weaponized it. Derek used his corporate connections to establish a highly shielded trust at Sterling Bank strictly under Martha Jean Caldwell's name. They forged her signature on the establishment documents. They funneled every single stolen dollar into that account. Their ultimate goal was sickening. They were simply waiting for her to die. I stopped breathing. The quiet hum of the car engine faded into a deafening silence. They were waiting for her to die. The words echoed in my skull. They were waiting for her to die. The sheer predatory sickness of it made the blood freeze in my veins. Riley continued, his voice steady, but carrying a heavy weight of professional disgust. Once Martha passed away, the funds would legally transfer back to Valerie as a completely clean, untraceable inheritance. The stolen millions would instantly become a legitimate windfall. They would pay off the shadow lenders, keep the surplus, and walk away looking like grieving beneficiaries. They actively banked on her mortality to cash out their criminal enterprise. I sat in the cold leather seat, my hands curling into tight, trembling fists. They had monetized my wife's death. They had turned her eventual passing into a calculated financial strategy. The depth of their depravity was staggering. They had driven her into the ground and prepared to dance on her grave. My entire life had been a monument to hard work, and my only child had grown into a parasite that fed on our very existence. But there is a complication. The young agent interrupted, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He pulled up a secondary log on the main monitor. I am analyzing the access history for the Sterling Trust account. Something is not aligning with their extraction timeline. Riley frowned, leaning closer to the glowing screen. What are you seeing? The younger agent pointed to a highlighted row of digital timestamps. According to the internal bank records, the master access code for the entire trust was fundamentally altered. It was not altered by Derek, and it was not altered by Valerie. The biometric overrides were engaged in person at the bank exactly 2 weeks before Martha suffered her fatal heart attack. Riley looked at me, profound realization dawning in his sharp eyes. He slowly turned the laptop screen so I could see the indisputable digital proof. Victor, Riley whispered, his voice laced with absolute awe. Your wife did not just figure out that she was being framed. She did not just leave a cryptic warning. The bank logs are absolute proof. She walked right into the downtown branch, sat down with the managing directors, and triggered a massive security protocol. What did she do? I asked, my voice barely more than a ragged rasp. Riley looked directly into my eyes, a fierce respect burning in his gaze. She did not steal the money, Victor. She trapped it. The young agent tapped the keyboard, pulling up a secondary screen filled with dense legal parameters and security overrides. Riley pointed to the center of the monitor. 2 weeks before she died, Martha realized exactly what Derek and Valerie were doing. Riley explained, his voice dropping into a register of profound respect. She understood the magnitude of the offshore money laundering syndicate operating out of Valerie's real estate firm. But more importantly, she recognized the terminal threat they had engineered against you. She saw the forged corporate indemnity agreement. She knew they were positioning you to absorb the catastrophic fallout when the shadow lenders inevitably came to collect their $2 million debt. instead of confronting them, which would have simply tipped them off and allowed them to destroy the evidence. Your wife made a highly tactical decision. She put on her coat, took a cab downtown, and walked directly into the Sterling Trust branch. She sat down with the highest-level wealth managers they had on staff. I stared at the glowing screen, trying to visualize my quiet, frugal wife navigating the opulent, intimidating halls of a private invitation-only financial fortress. She had spent her entire life clipping coupons at our scratched kitchen table. Yet when faced with the absolute destruction of our family, she had marched into the lion's den without a single ounce of hesitation. "What exactly did she do?" I asked, my voice tight, the freezing cold of the car completely forgotten. Riley leaned back in his leather seat. "She leveraged their own greed against them," he said bluntly. The account was originally structured by Derek as a standard offshore holding trust, with Martha listed as the sole primary beneficiary. Derek retained administrative access through a forged power of attorney, allowing him to funnel the illicit real estate profits into the account without triggering federal oversight. It was a classic ghost account. But because Martha was the legally named beneficiary, she retained the absolute right to alter the fundamental security architecture of the trust. And she did. She completely locked it down. The young technician beside Riley pulled up a scanned document. It was a security mandate heavily stamped and authorized by a senior banking official. Martha enacted a dead man's switch. Riley stated, letting the gravity of the term settle into the quiet space of the vehicle. It is a highly specialized fail-safe security protocol utilized almost exclusively by extremely high net worth individuals who fear extortion or corporate kidnapping. She completely revoked Derek's administrative access. She severed the digital routing numbers that connected the trust to his offshore accounts in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands. And then she initiated a strict, unbreakable two-factor biometric lockdown. I looked at him, the pieces of the puzzle aggressively slamming into place. The lipstick code. "Exactly," Riley confirmed. "The alphanumeric code written in the back of the blue passbook is the first key, but it is entirely useless on its own. The second key is what makes her countermeasure an act of absolute genius. She tied the physical release of the $4.8 million directly to your living, breathing body." Riley tapped the screen again. "According to the updated security mandate, not a single cent can be withdrawn, transferred, or liquidated unless Victor Caldwell is physically present inside the bank vault. You must provide a live biometric fingerprint scan, followed immediately by the manual entry of the passbook code. If anyone else attempts to access the funds, or if you are coerced into authorizing a transfer without being physically present to verify your identity on site, the trust instantly freezes and alerts federal regulators." A heavy silence fell over the vehicle. The sheer magnitude of what Martha had accomplished was staggering. My daughter and my son-in-law had spent years building a sophisticated multi-million-dollar criminal empire. They thought they were untouchables, insulated by their expensive lawyers and their dummy corporations. They thought they could simply sacrifice a tired old construction worker to appease the vicious shadow lenders hunting them down. But Martha had outsmarted them all. She had taken their $4.8 million war chest and essentially chained it to my heartbeat. They needed that money desperately to survive the impending collapse of their bridge loans. But they literally could not touch a single dime of it without me standing right beside them. I closed my eyes, feeling a sudden intense burn behind my eyelids. I forced it down, refusing to show any vulnerability in front of the federal agents. Martha had not been hoarding junk in that rusted tin box under our bed. She had been protecting the ultimate weapon. She knew her health was failing. She knew she might not survive the agonizing stress of discovering her own daughter's monstrous betrayal. So she turned her impending death into an impenetrable shield for me. By locking the funds behind my biometric signature, she ensured that Derek and Valerie could never simply discard me. They could not abandon me to the authorities or leave me to the mercy of the shadow lenders. They needed me alive. They needed me compliant. "That is why they were so eager to move you into their basement," Riley said, echoing my precise thoughts. "The very second they realized the account had been locked by your wife, They knew they had to keep you under their direct physical control. They invited you into their home to monitor you, to manipulate you, and to wait for the exact right moment to drag you down to Sterling Trust to unlock their stolen millions. They think I am ignorant, I said, my voice hardening into a cold, abrasive edge. They think I am a grieving, helpless old man who will just sign whatever papers they put in front of me because I am too tired to fight back. They think I do not know about the forged corporate indemnity agreement holding me liable for their $2 million debt. Riley nodded, his expression grim and calculating. That arrogance is exactly what we are going to exploit, Victor. We have the decrypted ledgers now. We have the offshore routing numbers, and we have absolute proof of their money laundering syndicate. The net is closing, but we need them to make one final irrefutable attempt to access the stolen funds. We need them to cross the line while we are watching. I looked down at my rough, heavily scarred hands, the hands that had built the foundation they now stood upon. I am going to tear their entire world down, I stated quietly. Before Riley could respond, a sharp vibration cut through the dense silence of the vehicle. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my outdated cell phone. The glare of the screen illuminated the dark cabin. I stared at the incoming notification. It was a text message from Valerie. The tone of the words was completely unhinged. She typed with a desperate fury that radiated directly through the digital text. She just received an alert from the bank regarding the frozen account. She demanded I return to the house immediately. The steel trap was ready. Derek unlocked the black sport utility vehicle with shaking hands. I climbed into the back row. The doors slammed shut, sealing us inside a vault of pure panic. Derek slammed his foot onto the accelerator, tearing out of the driveway and speeding toward the interstate. The interior of the car was completely silent. Valerie sat rigidly gripping her handbag. Derek kept glancing at me through the rearview mirror, his eyes darting frantically. When he finally spoke, his voice was no longer smooth. It was a vicious, serrated blade. Listen to me carefully. Victor. Derek started gripping the steering wheel. We are going to walk into Sterling Trust. You are going to smile, nod, and sign every document Harrison Reed puts in front of you. You will authorize the immediate transfer of those funds to my designated escrow account. If you hesitate or pull a stunt, I will completely destroy the rest of your pathetic life. I turned my head, slowly looking out the window. I did not utter a word. I am not joking, Derek sneered. I have lawyers who specialize in asset liquidation. If you do not unlock that account today, I will file an emergency petition tomorrow morning. I will declare you mentally incompetent. I will testify your grief has driven you insane, and I will use the forged indemnity agreement to legally seize your house, your pension, and every dime you saved. You will spend your final years rotting in a facility with nothing. Still, I said nothing. I watched the sprawling Chicago skyline rise up in the distance. I listened to his threats, absorbing the hatred radiating from the front seat. I glanced at the back of Valerie's head. I waited for the child I had bled for to tell her husband to stop threatening her father. But she remained entirely silent. She actively welcomed my destruction if it meant preserving her luxurious illusion. In that quiet car, the final thread of my paternal bond completely snapped. The realization brought a profound clinical clarity. The people sitting in the front seats were no longer my family. They were active predators, and they had just walked willingly into my snare. The miles dissolved under the heavy tires, bringing us deeper into the financial district. Derek weaved aggressively through the dense morning traffic. His desperation was a physical entity, a suffocating stench of sour panic. He kept listing the very specific legal mechanisms he would ruthlessly use to strip me of my humanity. He detailed how he would permanently freeze my checking accounts, legally, evict me from the home Martha and I had paid for, and drag my name through the mud in front of a civil judge. He wanted me terrified. He needed me paralyzed by the fear of poverty. He fundamentally misunderstood what a man who had survived 40 winters on icy steel scaffolding was capable of handling. The car jerked to a halt in front of Sterling Trust Bank. Derek threw the transmission into park, ignoring the angry horns lined up behind him. He jumped out and yanked my door open. "Let us go," he demanded, grabbing my elbow to pull me onto the sidewalk. I forcefully yanked my arm away from his soft grip. I smoothed the lapels of my charcoal suit, adjusted my cuffs, and walked toward the revolving glass doors under my own power. We stepped into the cavernous marble lobby. The air was cool and silent, a stark contrast to the frantic desperation radiating from my daughter and son-in-law. Valerie instantly took the lead. She marched across the pristine white floor, her high heels clicking aggressively. She bypassed the mahogany desks and walked directly toward the heavy oak doors at the far end of the room. She simply pushed the doors open and marched straight into Harrison Reed's private office. Harrison sat rigidly behind his immaculate glass desk, his posture unusually stiff. His face was incredibly pale and terribly drawn. He knew exactly what was happening. He knew a team of armed federal agents were actively monitoring every single breath we took in this room. He swallowed hard, adjusting his silk tie with a visibly trembling hand. The polished veneer of his executive status was rapidly deteriorating under the immense pressure. "Mr. Reed," Valerie announced, her voice sharp and commanding. "We do not have time for pleasantries today. My father is here to finalize the trust transfer. We need the biometric override protocols initiated immediately, and we need the entire balance of $4.8 million wired directly to the external corporate escrow account we provided last week. Process the power of attorney right now." Harrison looked past her, his nervous eyes briefly locking onto mine. He pulled out a thick stack of formal banking documents from his top drawer and placed them in the center of the glass desk. Valerie practically lunged forward, grabbing the paperwork and aggressively flipping to the final signature page. She smoothed the heavy paper flat, her breathing shallow and rapid. Derek stood right behind me, blocking the heavy oak door. His physical presence was a silent, looming threat, ensuring I had absolutely no path of retreat. "We are waiting, Mr. Reed," Derek hissed, checking his expensive wristwatch. "Initialize the biometric scanner." Harrison complied in silence. He reached under his desk and retrieved a sleek digital fingerprint reader. He placed it next to the stack of transfer documents. A green light on the device began to pulse steadily in the quiet room. Valerie turned to face me. Her eyes were devoid of any familial warmth. They were the eyes of a starving scavenger looking at a meal. She reached into her designer handbag, pulled out a heavy gold-plated fountain pen, and forcefully slammed it down onto the glass desk next to the glowing scanner. "We are done playing games," Dad, Valerie said, her voice vicious. "I know Mom left you the access code. I know exactly what you are holding in your pocket. You are going to press your thumb onto that scanner, dictate her code to Mr. Reed, and sign this document immediately. If you do not give us the code right this second, I swear to God, I will throw you out on the street to rot. I will take your house, your dignity, and let you die alone. Sign it." She slid the gold pen across the smooth glass. It stopped exactly 1 inch from my calloused hand. I looked down at the heavy gold pen. The metal gleamed brightly under the recessed office lights. I looked at the glowing biometric scanner pulsing patiently. I slowly lifted my gaze, letting my eyes trace the desperate faces of the people who had tried to bury me alive. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. I simply straightened my spine fully, shedding the frail old man persona standing as a towering pillar of absolute consequence. I picked up the gold pen. I looked my daughter dead in the eye. I clamped both my hands around the thick metal barrel and snapped the pen in half. I tossed the broken pieces onto the center of the glass desk. No. The sharp crack of the heavy gold pen snapping in half echoed like a gunshot in the sterile silence of the bank office. The 2 broken pieces clattered against the pristine glass desk, leaking a dark pool of black ink across the official transfer documents. Harrison Reed violently flinched in his high-backed leather chair, pressing his spine against the wall, as if trying to physically disappear into the expensive mahogany paneling. Valerie froze. She stared at the broken pen, her perfectly sculpted face contorting, as her brain desperately tried to process my blatant defiance. The delicate, sophisticated facade she had meticulously maintained for the entire corporate world completely melted away in a fraction of a second. It revealed the raw, vicious, and deeply greedy creature hiding just beneath her expensive skin. The air in the room grew heavy and suffocating. The glowing green light of the biometric scanner pulsed rhythmically, a silent witness to the complete collapse of their criminal empire. Valerie lunged forward, slamming both of her palms down onto the glass desk with a terrifying force. "You are nothing," she screamed, her voice tearing through the quiet room with a shrill, piercing pitch that made the heavy glass doors rattle in their frames. "You have absolutely nothing without us. You are a pathetic, washed-up old man who spent his entire life building a worthless, mediocre existence. We gave you luxury. We gave you a place in a world you could never comprehend. And this is how you repay us. You are ruining everything because of your stupid, meaningless pride. You will place your thumb on that scanner right now. If you do not give us the access code, I will make sure you spend the rest of your miserable life begging for scraps on the street. I will bury you so deep you will never see the light of day." Her chest heaved with ragged, desperate breaths. She was entirely unhinged, consumed by the terrifying realization that the millions of dollars she desperately needed were permanently locked behind a wall she could not break. Derek stepped out from the doorway, his face pale and completely slick, with a thick layer of panicked sweat. His corporate composure was entirely gone. He looked like a cornered rat. He reached out to grab my shoulder, trying to physically force me toward the pulsing green scanner. "Listen to your daughter, Victor," he stammered, his voice trembling with a pathetic, cowardly whine. "You do not understand the people we owe. They will kill us. They will kill you. Just sign the papers. Just give us the code. We can fix this right now. We can walk away clean. Please, Victor, do not do this to us." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I reached into the inside pocket of my charcoal suit jacket and pulled out the small, worn blue passbook. I held it up for a brief moment, letting the bright fluorescent office lights illuminate the cheap cardboard cover. The frayed edges and faded ink stood in stark contrast to the immense wealth surrounding us. Then I slammed it down onto the glass desk right next to the shattered fountain pen and the glowing biometric scanner. The loud smack made Derek jump back in sheer terror. "You told me your mother never had any money," I said, keeping my voice incredibly calm, perfectly even, and entirely devoid of mercy. "You told me she was foolish and small. You were right about the money. She did not have millions, but she had integrity. Something you could not afford with $5 million. Valerie stared at the blue passbook, recognizing the object instantly. Her eyes widened in absolute paralyzing horror. Before she could even open her mouth to utter another venomous threat, the heavy oak doors of the executive office burst violently open. The thick wood crashed against the marble wall with a deafening thunder that shook the entire room. Agent Riley strode through the doorway, flanked by a dozen heavily armed federal tactical agents. They flooded the confined space in a matter of seconds, their dark tactical uniforms and heavy body armor, creating an instant suffocating wall of absolute authority. The sheer overwhelming force of their entrance paralyzed every single person in the room. Harrison Reed immediately raised his trembling hands in the air, surrendering before a single instruction was even issued. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," Agent Riley announced, his voice a deep, resonant boom that left absolutely zero room for negotiation or escape. Nobody move a single muscle. The absolute panic in the room was instantaneous and incredibly chaotic. The tactical agents moved with practiced, lethal efficiency. They surrounded the desk, cutting off any possible exit routes. Two agents flanked Harrison Reed, pulling him out of his expensive leather chair and pressing him firmly against the mahogany wall. Another agent moved directly toward Derek. The heavy metallic click of steel handcuffs echoed sharply through the room as they secured the bank manager. The massive offshore money laundering syndicate that had operated in the shadows for years was finally being dismantled right in front of my eyes. The trap my brilliant wife had carefully designed had closed with terrifying precision. Derek completely collapsed. The moment the federal agents grabbed his arms, his legs gave out entirely. He fell to his knees on the polished marble floor, sobbing uncontrollably. The arrogant, wealthy corporate executive who had repeatedly threatened to destroy my life was completely gone. He was reduced to a weeping, pathetic child. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his pale, sweaty face. "Victor, please," he begged, his voice choking on his own desperate tears. "Please help me. Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them we were just trying to manage the trust. Please, Victor, I do not want to go to prison. I will give everything back. Just help me." I stood perfectly still, looking down at the man who had planned to use me as a human shield for his massive crimes. I did not offer him a single word of comfort. I simply watched him break. Valerie did not surrender quietly. When the agents reached for her, she erupted into a violent, feral struggle. She kicked, thrashed, and screamed at the top of her lungs. "You cannot do this to me," she shrieked, her voice cracking under the intense strain. "Do you know who I am? You cannot touch me!" As the agents forcefully pulled her arms behind her back and locked the cold steel cuffs around her wrists, she twisted her head to look at me. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She screamed terrible obscenities, cursing me as a traitor to my own blood. She spat venomous insults, blaming me for her entire downfall as they dragged her struggling body out of the executive office. Her furious screams echoed down the marble hallway, slowly fading into the distance until they were completely gone. I remained in the center of the shattered office. I stood tall, my expression forever stoic and unyielding. I watched my broken abusers fall, knowing absolute justice was finally served today. I had certainly won. 3 months have passed since that freezing morning at Sterling Trust. The dust has finally settled over the absolute terrifying wreckage of my daughter's life. Valerie and Derek did not get to walk away. They are currently serving lengthy federal sentences in separate penitentiaries. The massive, sprawling mansion they bragged about was seized by the government, along with every imported car, every designer suit, and every single dime of their stolen offshore accounts. The shadow lenders they feared so deeply were rounded up in the subsequent federal sweep, caught entirely off guard by the massive data dump Agent Riley secured from Derek's personal server. The criminal empire they thought made them untouchable evaporated like smoke in a strong wind. Because of my direct involvement and the extreme risk I took in bringing down the syndicate, the Department of Justice awarded me a legitimate whistleblower reward. The check was for slightly over $800,000. It was clean, honest money. I did not buy a sports car or take a luxury vacation. I used a portion of that reward to buy back the modest historic home Martha and I had originally shared. Walking back into that house was like taking my first real breath in months. The familiar creak of the hardwood floors, the afternoon light spilling through the bay windows, the simple, quiet peace of a life built on honest labor. It all welcomed me back. I spent weeks restoring the rooms, painting the walls, and repairing the front porch stairs that had bothered Martha for years. I stand in the living room now, a man who survived the ultimate betrayal by his own flesh and blood. The profound silence of the house is no longer a source of grief. It is a profound comfort. I no longer hear the hateful, demanding whispers of the people who saw my existence as a burden to bear. I only hear the steady, reassuring hum of a life reclaimed from the absolute brink of destruction. Every single morning is a victory. Every single evening is a quiet celebration of survival against insurmountable odds. I spend my early mornings on the porch drinking black coffee and watching the neighborhood wake up. I spend my afternoons tending to the small garden Martha loved so dearly. I often sit and think about her genius. I think about the sheer unwavering strength she possessed. Her final act of love was not just a warning. It was a flawless, impenetrable shield that saved my life. She knew our daughter had been corrupted by greed, and she knew I would be completely blind to it until it was too late. By locking that money behind my heartbeat, she forced the truth into the light. She gave me the power to dismantle my abusers completely. The pain of losing Valerie to her own monstrous ambition will likely never fade completely. A father always carries the scars of his children, but the agonizing weight of that betrayal has been replaced by a fierce, undeniable respect for the woman I married. Martha protected me from the grave. She proved that true brilliance does not require an expensive degree or a corner office. It requires a deep, abiding understanding of right and wrong. My life is incredibly simple now, exactly the way it should be. I do not have millions of dollars, and I do not have a sprawling estate. I have my dignity, my freedom, and my absolute peace of mind. I survived the darkest storm a parent could ever face, and I emerged completely intact. The cold winter has passed, and a new quiet spring has finally arrived in my life. The terrible chapter is permanently closed. The painful memories are securely locked away. I walk through my sturdy front door each morning with profound gratitude. I am safe. I am home. And I am entirely, wonderfully, and completely free. I spent my entire life breaking my back to build a solid foundation for my children, but I forgot one crucial detail. A house built on entitlement and greed will inevitably collapse. Blood does not give anyone a free pass to exploit you. Love should never be an excuse to endure abuse. Sometimes the most profound act of love a parent can commit is letting their children face the devastating consequences of their own actions. Integrity is the only currency that matters in the end. Everything else is just cheap paper waiting to burn in the fire of absolute truth. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle the ultimate betrayal? Drop your story in the comments below. If my journey gave you strength, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. Stay vigilant, stay incredibly strong, and goodbye for now.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low, but the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss,